Good morning, Australia, and good evening, Chile. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar, Grid Flexibility, the Australian Experience, and how can it help us in our transition. Last August 2020, the Chilean Minister of Energy issued the flexibility strategy for the national electric system. As is recognized internationally, the flexibility of electrical system has received greater prominence in recent years, mainly due to regulatory and technological modification that has been introduced in electrical system, generating a new paradigm described by a greater incorporation of renewable energy plant, an increase in distributed generation, removal of coal or nuclear-based power plant, active participation in demand, electromobility, storage system, among other aspects. In this sense, we believe that it is essential that the regulation of the sector adapt to these challenges, becoming an enabling platform for the harnessing flexibility of and development that is required in the national electric system. My name is Véliz-Varas, President of the Energy Committee of the Chile-Australian Chamber of Commerce, and as a representative of Auscham, I am very proud to be part of this initiative in sharing our lesson learned in this area between Australia and Chile. Finally, I would like to thank Luis Arqueros, who as of last September has taken on a new role as VP board member of Auscham and stepped down from his role as president of the Energy Committee. It is my pleasure to highlight his leadership, know-how, teamwork, and loyalty, which allowed us to develop activity that managed to share experiences between both countries. Thanks again. Luis, the floor is yours.
Good evening to everyone here in Chile, and good morning to some friends that are with us from Australia. Thanks, Christian, for your word, and my best wishes for your new challenges in the Energy Committee of Auscham. This is our third webinar session related with energy topics. Before we have the opportunity to discuss and share experience with Australia about green hydrogen and portability model. Retailer scheme is known in Australia. Now is the turn of flexibility in the grid. This is a very important concept and in a particular moment in our current market discussion today. Different players and authorities are today in Chile working on this topic. Certainly, to know more about the Australian experience will help us in our road trip. The speaker will present different points of view about this topic, and the moderator for our Q&A and further discussion will be Fernanda Errázuriz. She is the head and legal and public affairs in Pacific Hydro Chile. But before to start, I want to introduce the Honorable Australian Ambassador to Chile, Mr. Todd Mercer, who will say a few words to us.
Muchas gracias, Luis. Buenas tardes to those of you in Chile, and good day to everybody joining us from Australia. See, we have quite a big turnout, so that's always really encouraging, and it says a lot about the quality of these events that Auscham has organised. I think we're all going to be speaking in English today, and thank you to the interpreters that are assisting us. I mean, it's always an honour and a pleasure to participate in events organised by Auscham. I had the pleasure of meeting some of the Auscham executive today over lunch and made this point. But you know, this is yet another really impressive gathering of speakers, and I'd like to thank Luis, Christian, Jimena in particular for all of the effort that's gone into pulling this together, and of course acknowledge the commitment and the effort that our distinguished panelists Nicola, Aram and Juan Carlos are going to make, and to thank as well our moderator Fernanda for making the time and being here to share your insights with us today. This event, as with many of the events I've participated in since the beginning of the year, organised by Auscham, highlights yet another example of the diversity of shared interests that Australia and Chile have. You know, we have a lot in common in terms of our geography and the makeup of our economies, and I think we can benefit greatly by sharing our experiences. And tonight, or this morning for those in Australia, is another opportunity for us to do that. And the area of renewable energy is a really exciting area both for Chile and Australia. In the case of Australia, it's amazing to see in recent years the uptake of renewable energy, and to see that, and to think that we're on track again this year to continue growing, expanding the uptake of renewable energy at record rates. You know, the Clean Energy Regulator's latest quarterly carbon market report estimated that we'll have an additional renewable capacity of 6.3 gigawatts this year. Australia is a leader in renewable energy production, and when you look around Australian suburbs in all of the cities, already 1 in 4 Australian homes have solar panels on their roof. Our embrace in Australia of low emissions technology is good news on a range of levels in terms of lowering energy prices. It's good for the environment, and importantly, it's at this time as we come out of COVID-19 and look to grow our economies, it's also good for job growth. Chile's also quickly transitioning towards renewable energy as it moves to deliver on its commitment to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. With its massive solar resources in the Atacama Desert, with huge wind potential along the coast, Chile has enormous potential to generate renewable energy, not only for itself, but also in the form of green hydrogen, which has been a topic of quite a few of the conversations I've had in my time here. But I think it's also important to note that you know, for both of our countries, the uptake of renewable energy production also provides some challenges in terms of the reliability of our networks, and I know that's going to be a focus of the discussion tonight. For that reason, the Australian government announced a $1 billion grid reliability fund to help Australia's electricity network continue its transition to support the inclusion of renewable energy. Another focus for both of us, an important consideration, is energy storage. And through our technology investment roadmap, we're investing in storage technology like the recently announced 50 megawatts grid-connected lithium-ion battery project in Western Sydney, where I grew up. And it's worth noting that you know, for both of our countries, you know, this move to battery storage is also great news for our countries, given that we're the two biggest lithium producers in the world. Now, as I often say when I'm asked to sort of share our experience, I'm very clear to point out that we don't have all of the answers. And I think in this discussion, some of the struggles that we've had, I think they in themselves are important lessons that we can share with others. But it's clear that there are mutual benefits for us working together in these spaces. And I just wanted to note that Austrade has partnered with the CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency, and our Department of Industry's Entrepreneurs Program to provide a Chile Clean Energy Tech virtual boot camp to help Australian SMEs to understand this market and the strong emerging opportunities that the sector here can offer. And I understand, and I looked at the list of confirmed participants, I understand a number of those companies are participating in tuning into the conversation tonight. So for those of you that are looking at Latin America for the first time, a big hello and a welcome. And I just wanted to reassure you that the embassy is here, that as a team, and a very important part of the team is the Austrade office. So if there's anything we can assist with, please don't hesitate to be in contact. I'm not an expert on these issues, but for that reason, I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight. As I've done with many of these webinars that Auscham has organised, I've learned a hell of a lot, and I'm sure tonight or this morning will be no different. Listening to experts from the public sector in both countries, and also a leading Chilean representative from a leading Chilean renewable energy company, which has a very strong Australian connection. So I might leave my comments at that, and then now hand you over to our great moderator, Fernanda Errázuriz from Pacific Hydro. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, Ambassador. Well, good evening, Chile, and good morning, Australia. Thank you all for finding time and visiting today's webinar. I just want to remind you, if you need translation, you can find the instructions in the chat. So there is the explanation, so everyone can understand what the speakers are going to talk about. Well, my name is Fernanda Errázuriz. I'm Head of Legal and Corporate Affairs in Pacific Hydro Chile. And today I'm going to be moderating this panel. I'm very grateful for being able to participate in this webinar. So thank you very much for the invitation. This afternoon, we are going to talk about the grid flexibility and how the Australian experience can it help us in our transition in Chile. I'm pleased to welcome our three speakers for this webinar. Nicola Falcon, Acting Chief System Design and Engineering Officer of the Australian Energy Market Operator. She's going to share with us her expert opinion regarding the Australian perspective. Her presentation is Australia, Interruptible Renewable Generation from 20 years ago, Permanent Innovation and Future View. Our second speaker is Aram Pedinian Mohr, Business Development Manager at AEMO. He's going to talk about Chilean grid from hydrothermal system to the current and future renewable mix. And our third speaker is Juan Carlos Olmedo, Chairman of the Board of the Coordinador Eléctrico Nacional in Chile. Juan Carlos is going to talk about the national role of the National Electricity Coordinator in our transition stage. We are very lucky to have the opportunity to hear what these three experts panelists are going to say. Their expertise and their different point of view allow us to increase our knowledge regarding the grid flexibility and the challenges that this involves. Please, if you have any question regarding the presentation of our three speakers, please write your questions in the Q&A. So at the end of all presentations, we are going to have a Q&A session with our panelists. So thank you. This panel is going to start with the presentation of Nicola Falcon. Nicola has nearly 20 years of experience in the energy and environment sectors and has managed assignments in Australia, New Zealand, Asia, Africa, and North America. As Group Manager of Forecasting at the Australian Energy Market Operator, Nicola leads network and supply planning teams to assess future electricity and gas supply needs and provide insights to facilitate market responses and provide strategic advice on the transmission needs of the national electricity market. Nicola heads up major publications, including the Gas Statement of Opportunities, Electricity Statement of Opportunities, and helps provide critical modeling that supports AEMO Integrated System Plan. Nicola specializes in providing strategic advice on issues relating to energy markets and systems, as well as market modeling, statistical, economic, and commercial analysis. Please welcome Nicola for her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Fernanda, for the welcome. I'll just share my screen. Let's make sure that works. Can you just confirm, can you see my screen, the full screen? Is that coming through okay, or is it just the speaker's side?
It's perfect.
Wonderful. So yes, thank you again for the welcome and the opportunity to participate in this session this morning for me. I think it's a great opportunity for us all to get together and learn. Now, as in many respects, Australia is leading the world in the energy transformation, which is meaning that we need to learn rapidly and learn fast. Really, Australia has one of the most challenging physical environments due to our size, population base, aging infrastructure, and climate conditions. Our power system is long, it's skinny, and it serves a small population. In comparison to the geographic area of the national electricity market, which we call the NEM, which we have approximately 23 million people being served from that system. I estimate that the Chilean transmission system, you're seeing, is about half the size, with half the installed generation capacity, but serving a similar population. So the generation mix in the NEM is changing rapidly, and over the last 10 years, we've seen about 5,000 megawatts of thermal generation retiring. Over the same period, we've seen about 10 gigawatts of variable renewable energy installed on the grid, which I think you call interruptible renewable energy. And we've also seen a further 10 gigawatts of rooftop photovoltaics, or PV, installed on people's homes. Now, looking forward, we're actually by 2040 expecting to see even more rapid and profound change in the system. The generators in our system are aging, and most of them have reported, or at least 63% of them have reported, that they'll be retiring before 2040. Now, just to put that in perspective for you, that's equivalent to us needing to find sufficient electricity to repower all of Australian homes and a proportion of businesses. Based on the economics of the various technologies at this moment and our projections on how those economics will change over time, we anticipate that a distributed energy capacity is going to double or even triple over that period, and that distributed energy resources, particularly rooftop PV, will provide up to 22% of total energy by 2040. We also expect that more than 26 gigawatts of new variable renewable generation is going to be required to replace that 15 gigawatts of retiring coal. Now, remember, the last 20 years, we've seen 10 to 11 gigawatts of renewable generation installed, and we're now saying that in the next 20 years, that's going to be twice as rapid, twice as fast. And to be able to support that, we need anything from 6 to 19 gigawatts of new dispatchable resources, which are going to provide the flexibility and back up the renewable generation. Most of that dispatchable resources at this stage, we're anticipating will be battery storages or pumped hydro storages, but there will still remain a role for gas in peaking when the wind is not blowing, the sun's not shining, and we have very, very hot days. So this chart just shows in a graphical representation of how the transformation is going to play out. You can see the decline in the black and brown coal by the black and brown bars on this chart, starting at a base of 21, 22 today and heading down quite dramatically to 2040 as that coal generation retires. You can also see in this chart the green, orange and yellow bars that represent the new wind and solar generation that we're anticipating will come into the market in that time. The difference between the orange and the lighter yellow bars is they're both still solar, so it's both still going to generate at about the same time in the day, just one's on grid and one's behind the meter, or typically on people's homes and roofs and so forth. You can also see that we've got a dashed line here that represents the amount of equivalent dispatchable resources that we see will be involved in the NEM. And our demand on the grid is not growing significantly. So as we're losing more and more coal from the system, we are needing to replace it with higher volumes of installed capacity to meet the same amount of energy simply because of the resource constraints on renewable generation. But really what you can see from this chart is how profoundly the generation mix in NEM is expected to change to 2040. Now, the solar story in Australia is an interesting one, and the ambassador has already touched on it briefly in his introduction. We're seeing in 2020 about 2.5 million systems in the NEM. That represents about 8 to 10% of total electricity capacity if you consider both the behind the meter as well as grid connected generation. At least 20% of homes are having rooftop PV installed on them now, and in some states there is 1 in 3 households. Just to put in perspective, we've had record uptake this last year, and at the moment, on average, 15 panels are being installed on homes every minute in Australia. Now, South Australia is a particularly interesting case in point, and the chart we've got here shows us the record that we hit this year in October, where for 1 hour we had all of South Australia's demand being met by solar, whether it be rooftop PV or grid scale solar during the middle of the day. The grid demand dropped to a record low of about 300 megawatts, and that record has since been broken again. Under certain conditions, we can anticipate that we may reach close to zero grid demand in South Australia in the next 14 months. And this declining minimum grid demand is leading to some issues with managing voltage, managing system strength, and managing inertia that we're getting on top of rapidly at the moment. So as we get more wind and solar into the system, we are placing greater reliance on weather as a fuel, which means that we are more exposed to the vagaries of weather, both on our demand side, because many consumers will be turning on their air conditioners when temperatures get hot, and so we see very dramatic peaks in demand at those times. But also it means that our supply is going to be equally exposed to the weather, whether it's strong wind gusts. We're finding that in high temperatures, wind can be impacted and shut down, as well as deterioration in the solar efficiency and so forth. This case in point is what our operational forecasters call their worst nightmare. It's a snapshot from a couple of years ago, but it highlights very vividly, I think, some of the challenges that we as an operator of the system need to now deal with as we get more and more renewable generation on the system. This time, instead of the entire demand being met by solar, the entire demand was met by renewable resources, but it was during winter, so there was very little solar and large amounts of wind. We then had a sudden wind change come through. And it just happened that that sudden wind change coincided with the evening peak. So it was just starting to ramp up demand as people were coming home from work and so forth. And then we got a sudden wind change and the wind dropped off completely. Now what that means is that we needed to find a lot of ramping capability fast to provide a flexible response as the wind dropped down, the solar was cutting off because it was getting towards evening, and yet the demand was increasing. And it also highlighted for us the need for visibility to be able to anticipate those changes. So we're working very closely with our Bureau of Meteorology so that we can better anticipate when these wind changes might be coming through the system, and therefore what we need to be able to do to make sure we've got enough firming and flexible supply online to respond in time. Now, with so much solar and wind generation in the system, we have learnt that enhanced grid and service capabilities will be required to ensure that the system remains physically secure throughout the transition. To make sure electricity is available and can get to everyone safely when people need it, a range of physical properties of the power system need to be managed, and these include the balance of supply and demand in real time, managing uncertainty and variability in sort of the scale of minutes, and I've touched on some of the case studies and case in point there, managing frequency in seconds and even in milliseconds, and then monitoring system strength and inertia. Now, if those properties are not kept in check, electricity can become unsafe to use, or even a large amount of people may temporarily lose power. You might find strange things happening to your solar panels tripping off, lights flickering, and even fuse switches blowing. We're working to understand how these properties can best be managed. And our renewable integration study, which we published earlier this year, and I've left you the link on the slide, have recommended a number of actions that will need to be taken to address some of the challenges identified. And it concluded that if these actions are taken, the NEM could be operated securely with up to 75% instantaneous penetration of wind and solar. And one of the technologies we are making great use of to complement the renewable generation is battery energy storage systems. And again, the ambassador touched on this in his introduction. Until recently, we had the largest single battery storage in the world, Australia's Hornsdale Power Reserve. It was 150 megawatts and 187 megawatt hours. The record is now held by the 250 megawatt Gateway project in California, but not for long. The Victorian government recently announced plans to build a 300 megawatt battery in Australia in the not too distant future. There are also several other battery storage projects already in service or committed, and there's about 6 gigawatts and 11 gigawatt hours in the planning pipeline. These projects are often coupled with renewable generation as an additional feature, like the Bulgana Green Power Hub, which is a wind and storage project, or the Kennedy Energy Park, which is a solar PV wind and storage hybrid project. Our Dalrymple battery plant, the 30 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour system, is a grid forming inverter, and as such can provide synthetic or virtual inertia. The other batteries are grid following, and they can provide very fast frequency response. The synthetic inertia and the frequency response have helped us to manage rates of change of frequency on the power system following disturbances. In the last few years, these batteries have proven very reliable and effective in a fast active power response to frequency disturbance and have put downward pressure on frequency control ancillary service costs to consumers. Now, given the pace and complexity of change in the NEM, our renewable integration study also highlighted the need for flexible market and regulatory frameworks that can adapt swiftly and effectively as a power system evolves and incentivise the right investment. Now, our Energy Security Board and market bodies are exploring essential regulatory and market reforms to attract investment and optimise bidding of supply and demand-based energy resources. These include initiatives to encourage consumer participation in the market, value demand flexibility and essential system services, and options to incentivise generators to invest in a manner that allows transmission and generation to be coordinated. In Australia, we've been caught out in the past with rapid, uncoordinated and unanticipated development of renewable generation and distributed resources. We're now far more focused on design thinking, making sure we have the technologies, markets and regulatory arrangements in place in time to support the transition in a coordinated way that is in the best interest of consumers. And thank you for the time to share our experiences with you all.
Thank you, Nicola. I think it was a very interesting presentation. I was very impressed when you talk about the amount of solar plants in the system and the amount of storage battery that you have. Certainly, it was great to hear the Australian experience and how your country are managing this grid flexibility. There is a lot that we can learn from you. I have some questions, but I think I'm going to ask you in the Q&A session. For now, I want to present the second speaker, Aram Pedinian Mohr. He's the Business Development Manager of AME. Aram is a civil industrial engineer, master in business engineering from the Adolfo Ibáñez University. Aram has 10 years of experience in the Chilean electricity sector, where he has been mainly focused in the development of projects and commercial businesses in the electricity sector in Chile, in the companies Hidromaule, Engie, and currently in Andes Mining and Energy, where he also participates in the development of projects based on the production of green hydrogen and synthetic fuels. Please welcome Aram Pedinian.
Thank you, Fernanda, and thank you to everyone that is listening. Good evening to all the Chilean people that are hearing the conference and everyone in Australia also. I will start now sharing my screen. Just a minute here. So you should be able to see the presentation now.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, thank you. So as Fernanda said, I'm going to talk about the Chilean grid from the hydrothermal system to the current and future renewable mix. So I prepared some information and the content of the presentation will be about, first we're going to look about system overview. We're going to see the renewable penetration historically in the Chilean grid. We're going to also mention about the decarbonization plan that Chile is pushing. We're going to look at the renewable outlook, the future renewable outlook, and then we're going to mention, just to put on the table, the future challenges that we're going to have in the current Chilean market. So Chile, it's a pretty long country. You can see here in the figure, we have 4,400 kilometer length country, and it's separated in 3 grids. This southern grids, Aysén and Magallanes, are really small, and the biggest grid that we have is the Sen, where we have 98.5% of population. The length of this system is 3,000 kilometers, and the installed capacity of the system is 24.7 gigawatts. So, as mentioned before by the ambassador and other colleagues, Chile is really similar to Australia. We don't have too much of transmission lines, but we have a lot of renewable resources. We don't have actually too much fossil sources. So that was, I think, an issue before when the system was mainly, and we had a lot of thermal component, but now looking to the future, where we see a lot of renewable penetration, then it's a bright future for Chile. So, just before 2017, the SEN system was separated into 2. We had the SYNC system and the SIG system. The SYNC system was in the north extreme part of Chile. 90% of the demand there is from the mining companies. It's a pretty stable demand. And since we don't have hydropower in the north of Chile, we only have 1 power plant, which is 10 megawatt plant. And the rest of the plants in the north part are mostly thermal from gas and coal. And in the SIG system, it was a little bit different. We have a lot of hydro power plants and resource, and the rest of the system was mainly served by coal and gas plants. 60% of the demand in the SIG system is from household and just regular commercial businesses. So regarding the capacity, the installed capacity, I mentioned we have 24.7 gigawatts of capacity installed, and it's separated in 50% thermal units and 50% renewable sources units, which are mainly from hydro. We have 12% solar, 9% wind, and just 2% of biomass. These are numbers from April 2020. And then regarding the energy generation during 2019, we have more than 50% of thermal generation, mainly coal plants, which are 37% of the energy generation. So, in a summary, we have more or less 24% of installed capacity, which is non-conventional renewable energy. I'm talking here regarding wind, solar, and small hydro. I'm not considering here the bigger hydro plants, which are bigger than 20 megawatts. Then, regarding the generation, we have 45% of generation from renewable sources right now, and this is counting the large hydro plants. So we are a pretty clean. We have a pretty clean grid generation. We were cleaner before, long time ago, because the system started with hydro electric plants, and then since wind and solar were too expensive, we started growing with coal, but now we're phasing out of coal and keeping the hydro. We started as a pretty clean country and then started growing with coal, and now we're going to phase out of coal and go green again. And around 50% of the annual generation comes from wind and solar, which is not too high percentage considering Australia, for example, but we are growing pretty fast. This is the system generation, the historical. So we can see on this left side, during 2010, for example, we didn't have any solar or wind plants operating. We had a lot of hydro plants. We had coal plants, some gas, and actually some diesel. And that's where prices were very high in the system. But then suddenly, and mainly in 2014, wind and solar plants started growing a lot in the system, and it's expanding the system through these technologies. And this is mainly because of the cost. Before that, wind and solar technologies were pretty expensive, and then when the market started developing this kind of technologies, the pricing went down. So solar and wind plants started to be very convenient for the investment. So during this whole time, we grew on coal, but we also started growing in wind and solar technologies. And considering the marginal cost of energy of the power system, which is the cost and the price that generation units trade energy, well, we had very high prices 5 years ago, or more than 5 years ago, and this is where we saw the diesel plants operating. But then the renewable energy that came into the system actually helped the system to lower the pricing. And this is also with other kind of and variables that came into the system, because also we grew a lot with coal plants. So renewables help in reducing the price, but also coal plants and other units also help with the pricing reduction. This is mainly because of an offer and demand, a supply and demand equilibrium. So, as I mentioned, since 2010, the renewable energy and non-conventional renewable energy started growing in the system. And I think in 2014, it started growing by a very high rate and in an exponential growth regarding wind and solar, mainly wind and solar plants. We see that the biomass grew, but not too much. Small hydro also grew, but really the wind and solar plants are the ones that made the most in this non-conventional growth. So we see that 80 more than 80% of the growth has been, and the installed capacity of non-conventional renewable energy is because of wind and solar plants right now. So since 2000, we have almost 6 gigs of new capacity installed in non-conventional renewable energy, mostly on wind and solar. So this is just to give an example, and it's very similar to the example that Nicola showed before from Australia. Solar and wind energy plants are in this color here. We see solar in yellow and wind in green. And right now, solar plants and wind plants are not do not have a very high participation in the generation, but they are definitely growing. We are not in the current situation of Australia, but we are growing, and we will go to that situation, and it is expected to be very soon, considering also the decarbonization plan. So right now, we have pretty stable sources regarding coal, hydro. We have hydro storage in the system that is helping us to balance the system. With the growth in the wind and solar plants, definitely the hourly system stability will get more important and will be a challenge in the future. Before we had, remember, we had hydro, we had coal, we had gas plants, and those plants are really stable. So really the challenge was to balance the system between months or seasons regarding the hydro season, where we had a lot of hydro energy. But now, with the introduction of solar and wind plants, really the challenge will be more focused in balancing the system in the intraday, only in an hourly based matter. So when the solar plants start growing up and the wind plant grow in the future, this will be more important. So, as I mentioned before, during July 2019, the Chilean government made an agreement with 4 companies in the system, which were the owners of the coal plants, all the coal plants in Chile. And it was consisting in the decommissionation of all the coal plants by 2040. So it was, and the agreement considers a 2-phase plan The first one is a short-term decommissioning of just the very old coal plants, and this is 1,000 megawatt sum of many plants, which is almost 20% of all the coal plants, and these coal plants will be decommissioned, will be phased out of the system by 2024. And then there is a medium to long-term decommissioning plan for the rest of the coal plants, which are more than 4 gigs of coal plants by 2040. And this medium to long-term decommissioning will be discussed and defined every 5 years. So now, a recent parliament motion, it's being pushed and was approved to accelerate this decommissioning plan. So now they're discussing if the old coal plants will be phased out by 2025, which is a big challenge because it's 4,400 megawatts of capacity that is gone in the system, and this is capacity that is really stable. And the only way to replace this energy we have only projects regarding wind and solar energy mainly, so we don't have too many projects that could stabilize the grid. So this is one of the news that came on 3rd of November, and it says that if the decarbonization plan is approved, there could be situations where we see the marginal cost of energy going up to $570 per megawatt hour. So this is really a huge challenge. So I don't know if it's going to happen. We can discuss that. So for the future, we see that 77% of the projects that have been declared under construction are wind and solar. This is 5.8 gigawatts. Some of them are being already in the construction phase. Some of them will start construction really soon. But this is a lot of capacity that will be installed in the system in the near future. Then, if we see all the capacity that is under environmental evaluation, taking and trying to get the permit, the environmental permit, we see that 83% of the projects are wind and solar. And this is an equivalent of 10.8 gigawatts of energy, of capacity. And this is a lot of capacity that could be installed in the system. So as we saw before with the Australian example, the future and the near future of Chile will probably look very similar to the Australian, where we see days that most of the demand will be administered with wind or solar energy. And that's a real challenge because we need something to stabilize the grid. So the current situation, and as a summary, the Chilean market is a cost-based market. We have only energy and sufficiency power as the remuneration for generation units. There is a pending discussion regarding the sufficiency power of renewables, and also other types of energy, for example, storage. We didn't have the necessity before because energy sources, as we saw in the graphs, were pretty stable. So we just needed frequency regulation and spinning reserve in the system to just keep them stable. We had, and we have in the system, we have battery assets currently running, but this only with very particular business model, which were complementing the spinning reserve of some coal plants in the north. So it was basically an energy business with these batteries. So they didn't have the intention to do modulation as the Australian project, for example. And right now, and the latest regulation that were implemented are, for example, a transmission law that will encourage the development of more renewable assets in the system. This is because transmission will be getting ahead of some renewable projects and renewable poles in the system. It is worthily to say that since Chile is a really long and straight country, we do not have grid integration, for example, with Argentina. We don't have grid integration with Peru right now. So the system, it's really long, and we only have, I don't know, 3-4 big lines that connect the north to the south, but we don't have such a high gridded energy grid. So with all the renewable developments, we definitely will need to increase this transmission lines in order to keep the system stable. And then we have some improvement in the ancillary service regulation. The ancillary service market started this year. It's being watched by the regulator, and we are having some issues regarding the ancillary services right now. But as I mentioned, this is only starting. It's very small market, and we need definitely to learn more about it and how to correct it and make it perfectly. So what we see is that there is really high renewable penetration. Something really similar than Australia will be expected in the system. And this will require flexible market. So we need to structure the policies and regulations to do this in an efficient way and to secure stability in the system. So we have new penetration in renewables, and we will have definitely a growth in distributed generation, rooftop, for example. We have rooftop right now, but probably this will increase in the following years. Electromobility is something that may also be in as a factor in this system, and we also have the hydrogen economy. Chile has a great opportunity in the hydrogen business, as the ambassador mentioned before. So we need to be prepared for this. And right now, we are starting with the flexibility law discussion, and this will definitely have implications, for example, in the sufficiency power. It's already mentioned, and we need to structure this in a very good way in order to keep the system running and all the investments and growth running. So the future challenge, and I put this on the table in order to have the discussion later on. We and the system needs long-term clear definitions and the correct signals to the market in order to keep this market growing and with low pricing and very high competitive in it. We definitely, since Chile is very particular in some ways in the geography, in the current regulation, we need a soft and fluid transition to this new regulation without damaging current investment and operations. That's key and fundamental. So this will probably be a long-term transition, and we need to try to vision the future in order to structure this market in a correct way. And the key, and one of the key questions that I put here is, who is going to pay for the cost of this flexibility? Because everything here obviously has a price. So that's an open question that I will leave there. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Aram. For me, it was great to hear how much Chile is growing in renewable energy and projects. Certainly, it's going to be very challenging how to deal with the flexibility. So maybe our third speaker can talk about that. I will introduce our third speaker is Juan Carlos Olmedo, Chairman of the Board of Coordinador Eléctrico Nacional. Juan Carlos Olmedo is a civil industrial engineer from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. He has an MBA from the Adolfo Ibáñez University and a certificate in management from the Darden School of Business, University of Virginia. He has more than 30 years of experience in the electricity sector in Chile and Latin America. He has served in executive positions, boards of electrical companies and foundations. He is currently president of the board of directors of the National Electric Coordinator in Chile. Please welcome Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Fernanda. Good morning for the people in Australia and good evening for the people in Chile. I'm going to speak about energy and sustainability growth, about challenge, experience, and opportunities. Well, some figures about Chile. I'm not going to be in detail because recently we have heard about the figures. The main issue is our installed capacity is around 2,000 terawatts. And the energy that we expect to produce during this year is 77, roughly 1,000 gigawatt hours. And the peak demand is around 11,000 megawatts. Well, we are dealing with the power drivers for a sustainable growth that we call 4Ds. I mean, decarbonization, that's focused to reduce carbon intensity in energy, and renewable expansion, and the commissioning of coal-fired plants. Also, digitalization. We need to connect all facilities and elements of the grids, the coming of smart grids, and the Internet of Things. Also, decentralization, moving away from the grid, and the growth of distributed generation and storage in a decentralized grid architecture. And also, democratization. The emerging technologies offer potential for consumers to engage nearly effortless. Prosumers and responsive demand will be the future. And the objective is to have affordable, reliable, and resilient electricity supply. And we need to solve the energy trilemma. The sustainable growth in energy has to solve this trilemma. Energy security, energy accessibility and affordability, and environmental sustainability. We need to review and modify a power market regulation to enable competition, avoiding cross subsidies, and ensure an efficient risk allocation and management. The power market enables in Chile has been the deregulation of the power market that has been very successful. And we have learned that we need a constant improvement in regulation. And in the timeline, you can see the most important milestones in the improvement of our regulation. And we can talk about carbon tax recently by 2014, and the modification of distribution trade net process by 2016. And also Chile is leading the energy transition to a carbon neutral world by 2050. In 2019, by June, the Ministry, Susana Jimenez, subscribed an agreement to decommission all coal-fired plants by 2040. And also, the Secretary of United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has recognized Chile as a leading country to reach carbon neutrality. And you know, exceeds a net zero emission running, where Chile is in the top 10 countries. And we have elaborated a decarbonization reference scenario where we have considered the decommissioning of all coal-fired plants by 2038 to complete the decommissioning of all coal-fired plants by 2040. And you can see in this graph the reduction of installed capacity of coal-fired plants through the time. And this is a challenge. We need to replace all those coal-fired plants with renewable energy resources. And we are leading the integration of renewable technology in the region. The variable renewable energy integration in the grid has reached roughly 6,000 megawatts. And that is a huge amount, considering that our peak demand is 12,000 megawatts. And also, the obligation established in the law to provide renewable energy has been surpassed dramatically since 2011. Also, the number of market agents has been increasing dramatically. Today, we have reached roughly 500 agents in the market, and the number of non-regulated clients in the network is nearly 2,000. Also, we have seen a growth in the distributed energy resources. Roughly is 1,100 megawatts that represent approximately 10% of the peak demand. Also, the challenge is the transmission expansion, because we need a lot of transmission to supply the renewable energy resources, considering that roughly 60% of all demand is in the central part of the country. And we expect for the next 5 years an investment of $3 billion in transmission facilities, where the most important project is a new HVDC line from Quimal to in the second region to Loaguirre in the metropolitan region. That represents roughly $1.3 billion American dollars of investment. And the process is, the tender process has started September the 1st. Well, the challenge and goals in the Chilean power markets are 5. Well, first of all, decarbonization. We need to decommission all coal-fired plants by 2040. And we have a target of reach more than 70% of renewables by 2050. And we have to deal with an increase in the electricity consumption, because electricity will replace fossil fuels in different ways, since transportation to consume in households. Also, we expect that the consumption of electricity will be duplicated by 2050. And also we need smart grid integration due the prosumers. And we have to match our commitments regarding climate change adaptation and mitigation. Also, we have seen natural gas as a transition fuel to replace more intensive fuels in carbon. And also transmission and distribution network needs development. I mentioned new HVDC transmission line, and that expansion will provide flexibility and resiliency against climate change. Also, distribution networks need to be developed and need allowed to connect the new DERs. Well, what we do is not rocket science. It's much more important than that. This is a phrase from the CEO of PGM and represent what are we doing to reach the commitments of our country by 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. It was great to hear your presentation. Maybe I want to ask you some questions that we have in the Q&A chat. So if the speakers can turn on the camera, it would be great. Just to start with the Q&A session. Aram?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you turn on your camera for the Q&A session? Okay,
There you
okay, thank you. Yeah, now I see you. Okay, well, I want to thank you all for your great presentations. I think they're going to be very challenging for our country to manage this grid flexibility. And certainly we have a lot to learn with the Australian market. So I have some questions here. I would like to start with Aram. Aram, we have a question. Is there a centralized system to monitor and control these distributed energy resources? What system is used and what is the entity in charge?
Okay, well, yes, there is a centralized system to monitor and control these distributed energy resources. And actually, we have the director of the system here, Juan Carlos Olmedo, and this distributed energy, it depends on the size, obviously, but if you have a rooftop, for example, in a house, then this is not monitored by the centralized system operator, but some solar plants, for example, or mini hydro that are connected into the distribution energy grid, those, for example, more than 500 kilowatts, those are being monitored by the system operator. But really, the small scale plants on their houses, on buildings, or in an industry, for example, for self-consumption, those are not currently monitored by the system operator. I don't know if Juan Carlos want to add something there, maybe.
That's okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Now I have a question for Nicola. Nicola, do you think the pumped hydro technology is a good solution for the grid flexibility?
Thanks for the question. It's the analysis we've done shows that we need lots of different duration storages. So we looked at storages that are, right down at the Hornsdale type level, where we're getting millisecond type responses to help with frequency control. But we're also going to need to have deep storages, and there's a couple of big projects being looked at the moment, including something called our Snowy 2.0 scheme that has about a week's storage. And those are going to be needed at the other end of the scale for really being able to store during wind droughts and deliver seasonal battery storage and so forth, not battery storage, but seasonal storage for, when we have periods where the sun's not as strong and so forth. So I think you're going to need to have a combination. Now, whether it's pump hydro or some other technologies, there are definitely other technologies being looked at out there that provide that depth of storage. But the point is you're going to need to have a number of different types of energy storage to manage the flexibility in the system for different services.
Thank you, Nicola, for your answer. Juan Carlos, I have a question for you. Considering the large amount of investment required for the transmission expansion, is Chile considering to reduce this investment by including microgrids in the near future?
No, it's not possible. I'm not talking that we will not develop microgrids, but we need to develop the transmission system because the renewable energy resources are far from the consumption center. As I mentioned previously, 60% of the electricity demand is in central part of the country, but the renewable energy resources are in the extreme north and the extreme south. And additionally, we need to improve our transmission system to provide resiliency to the climate change. And then for those reasons, it is not possible to reduce the investment in transmission system by now.
Perfect, Juan Carlos. Thank you for the answer. I have a question here from the audience for Aram. Will Chile be looking to use aggregated DERs for FCAS and flexibility issues? Any rule changes being brought in to encourage DER participation in this space? I don't know what is DERs. Do you know what this question is about?
I can decode it for you if you like, Aram. DERs is our distributed energy resources. So that's what we call our rooftop PV, batteries, electric vehicles, and so forth. And FCAS is our frequency control ancillary service market. So that might give you some context.
Thank you, Nicola. Aram, do you want to talk and to answer this question? I think you're in mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Yes, I was in mute. Okay. Sure, we will be looking probably for any type of sources and resources that we could have that are efficient to the system. Right now, we are about to structure this this regulation. So this type of question that you did is part of the solution that we have to make. I think we should consider this kind of resources, but it's part of the job that we have to do regarding the regulation that needs to be in place to encourage this kind of resources.
Thank you, Aram. Juan Carlos, I want to ask you a question that I think it's going to be very relevant for the audience. What do you think of the recent flexibility regulation issued by the Ministry of Energy? Who pays or should pay for the flexibility? What's your opinion in this subject?
Well, I participate in that process. The ministry passed a strategy to provide flexibility to the system. You know, the high participation of variable renewable energy and the increase of agents in the market needs flexibility. Also, the decarbonization process implies the addition of new flexibility. For example, the decommissioning of coal-fired plants mean less inertia and short-circuit capacity, and we need to provide those resources to manage the quality of service and reliability. And that's something we need. And now we are in the discussion of on who will pay for that flexibility. It's part of the strategy to define who will pay.
Okay, Juan Carlos, thank you very much. It's going to be very challenging and very interesting discussion. Nicola, this is a question, and I personally, I'm very interested in that question because when I heard your presentation, it was very great, or maybe a little bit overwhelming, how much the rooftop solar penetrations are functioning in Australia. So the question is, what explains the high degree of rooftop solar penetration? Incentives, grid energy price, others?
Yes, is there all of the above? Look, we started to see rapid growth in rooftop PV probably 10 years ago. And at the time, we were talking about introducing a carbon price. Electricity prices were going high. I think there was probably a desire to take a little bit more control and ownership of your electricity costs and your electricity bills. And also at the time, there were a number of government rebates and feed-in tariffs and things like that that were encouraging it. So people could actually make money from installing rooftop PVs. And that really allowed the industry to start developing and growing. And the panels have got a lot better over that time, more efficient. We've learned a lot in terms of the integration of them. And we've got really good solar resources. So there is definitely a very good payback period on them. We're talking, 2 or 3 years to be able to pay back even on the current electricity prices, which is certainly a good trigger. And then there's a feel-good feeling. A lot of Australians like to, feel that they can do their part towards decarbonisation, and it's a great coffee table discussion for people to be talking about the size of their panels and whether they're going to put a battery storage system on and so forth. So, yes, there's a little bit of government support that's actually getting taken off to some degree now, though there is still a scheme underlying it that gives people certificates for installing that helps them with their sort of upfront cost. There's definitely sort of a social license and a desire in a community to continue with it, and we've got great resources. One of the things that we are finding is problematic with that is that minimum demand, as I mentioned, is becoming a real concern. And in fact, just even during this presentation, I got an email looking at the record sales from our rooftop PV this year. We thought COVID might actually deter people from installing PV systems. We've all globally been hit a little bit in the pockets with this terrible pandemic. But what we've actually seen is the reverse. It seems that a number of people being stuck at home have decided this is a good time to do their do-it-yourself project or get PV installed and try and help manage their residential bills, because what we've found, while many of us have been working from home and in lockdown, is that residential consumption has been going up significantly, and putting PVs on your system is a good way to be able to start taking back control over your electricity bills. So there's a lot of different factors coming into it, but the reality is that if we get minimum demands that are too low to allow us to control the system, we're going to need to start looking at emergency type controls to shut down some of that PV if we absolutely had to in a last case emergency to be able to manage the power system stably.
Thank you, Nicola. Very complete answer. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. I have a question that maybe Juan Carlos and Aram can say something about it. The question is, what aspects of flexibility are technologically and technically more mature for use in our country?
Well, today there are many emerging technologies. We have been working with a technology of thermal batteries called Carnot batteries. That is a way to recycle a coal-fired asset or thermal asset. The technology consists of eliminating the boiler and the chimney and replace with a system to melt salts and stored in the same way as CSP solar plants. And the idea is that you melt the salts with solar or renewable energy and store and to use that heat to produce steam, and that allow to generate the steam generator. And it's a way to store renewable energy using existing assets and allow us to accelerate the decarbonization process. And also, there are other technologies that are very old, of course, hydropower stations, gas engines, and hydro. There are many technologies. It's a matter of cost effectiveness.
Okay, thank you, Juan Carlos. Aram, do you want to add something?
Mostly, yeah. What Juan Carlos mentioned is correct, and I think it depends on the timing. So, in the short term, if we want to add flexibility to the grid, we may go probably with technologies, gas units, for example. Nowadays, the combined cycle units, the modern combined cycle units are very flexible. They can be shut down. They have a fast start. They have a really quick ramp up. So if you ask me to put flexibility in the short term, probably a gas unit, combined cycle gas unit will be the most cost effective. The problem that we could have with gas turbine obviously is the resource, because as I mentioned in the presentation, Chile is not rich in fossil fuels, so we may have to import the gas from Argentina or from another country through vessels. And then if we look forward to the future, what looks very, very good is battery storage, electrical batteries. There are also other technologies, what Juan Carlos mentioned also, and there is also CSP. CSP could be an alternative. And there are also other technologies regarding air pressure and mix it with hydro and pump hydro, stuff like that. So but we will see in the future if those are competitive or not.
There are other ways, because some technologies has naturally some grade of flexibility. For example, the hydropower station. And in the case of solar PV plants, there are a new technology called grid forming inverters. And that kind of inverters provide a lot of flexibility to the system. And one way is to modify our technical regulation for new power station to include that technology of grid-forming inverters, because today our plant has some standard inverters, the solar PV plants, I mean.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, and thank you, Aram. Well, we have a lot of questions, but right now we are on time. So I just want to say to the speakers that it was great to hear you all. For me, it was a huge privilege to be moderating this panel. So I want to thank you again to the speakers, to the organization and the audience. And I want to end this webinar presenting Jimena Lopez. He's the General Manager of Auscham for final words and closing remarks. So thank you all, and Jimena, please.
Thank you all for being part of this webinar today. Thanks, Fernanda, for being the moderator, and Ambassador Luis Cristian to be helping us. Also for all our attendees to be here with us. As Auscham, we are always looking to share and bring to Chile the expertise of the different learnings that Australia has in each matter. This is important for the collaboration that we can have between the two countries. We invite you to visit tomorrow our webpage to the recording of the webinar of this afternoon and learn more about Auscham. Thanks, and we will see you in another webinar.